Hi there! Are you looking at the world around you trying to figure out what is going on? Are you worried about your future or the future of your family? You are not alone. Starting with this video, I want to introduce you to a story that will sound like a fantasy novel. Despite sounding that way, it could be more true than you think. In this episode, I want to introduce you to those who formed the foundation of sentient life in our solar system. If you are asking right now, why would I care? I have a short answer for you. They are coming back to clean up the mess humanity has been making for quite a while. If this is your first time on this channel, please watch the video suggested in the upper right corner of your screen right now. You can find the link to it in the description under the video as well. It will help you understand what kind of content to expect from my channel. Also, I would like to kindly ask you to listen to the important information from the disclaimer that follows. If you already know the contents of the disclaimer, you can skip right to the main part of the video. Look at the chapters bar at the bottom of the video and choose what you like. So here goes the disclaimer. The content of the videos on this channel is just my opinion. It is based on conclusions that I have made by studying world mythologies and religions. Experts and researchers of mythology with scientific degrees do not share my opinion. I do not claim to know the truth. My videos are not science. They are not intended to be educational. If it makes you feel more comfortable, just consider it a fantasy story. Starting with this video, I intend to share with you my worldview. At this stage, I will not provide any references to the sources I have used for inspiration. It will take me a few weeks to complete my story, possibly even a couple of months. Then, I'll use the predictive power of my worldview. I will provide you with some testable predictions for the next 8 to 15 years. One single video should be enough for that. When done, I'll discuss and comment on the sources I mentioned a bit earlier. There are no calls to action within the content of my videos that could lead you to breaking the law. The only thing I would urge you to do is to continue studying the world in which you live, and to keep using your own judgment in deciding on your attitudes and actions. Every thought and every action has consequences. And now, let's move on to the story itself. As I mentioned earlier, over the next 3 months, you will get access to a completely different view of the world. We live in it together, but we see it differently. How much this new, or rather well-forgotten old view corresponds to reality, only time will tell. The vast majority of the inhabitants of our planet were born and died on a battlefield. They did that without even knowing it. They had no idea, because they, like most of those living today, had never seen any other kind of life. They believed, and still believe, that what goes on around them is a natural part of human experience. Without having something to compare it to, you can't know what normal or real life is. In time immemorial, two events happened relatively soon one after the other. They have shaped our past, present, and future. Hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years ago, a group of researchers arrived into our solar system. Exactly when and how they arrived here, we may find out in a few decades, or even sooner. At this point in time, it doesn't really matter. Their knowledge of the laws of the universe was so vast that humanity can only dream of it. And they were not human. There were no humans back then. The group consisted of beings belonging to several races, all of which we are familiar with. Elves, dwarves, serpent-like dragons, dragons of the so-called Western type, and there were those I call supreme dragons. They were supreme due to their knowledge, strength, and the responsibility they took on. It was not about some kind of hierarchy. The initiator of this expedition was a supreme dragon, whom we will call Thea. There was another race on that team that many people talk about these days. Some call them the Anunnaki, some call them reptilians. I'll call them reptis, for the sake of clarity. They were upright, sentient reptiles. This whole group of researchers amassed a vast collection of flora and fauna from all over the universe. When they arrived here, they intended to begin researching each specimen. After that, they planned to conduct simulations of different, never-seen-before habitats. They decided to use our whole star system as a lab. There was nothing to prevent them from doing that. Before their arrival, there were only primitive life forms here, the ones that had not changed for millions of years. Before they could start the experiments, though, they needed to redesign and rebuild this star system. The larger planets were moved away from the local star. The smaller planets were placed between the largest of them and the Sun. Thus began a story that can be found these days only in one source, Scandinavian mythology. According to that mythology, in the beginning life appeared between ice and fire, between Niflheim and Muspelheim, between Jupiter and the Sun. In between these two celestial bodies, the beings that resembled the Western-style dragons placed 5 planets that were to become inhabited. The world, closest to the star, was given to the dwarves. Scandinavian mythology also calls them dark elves. They got Mercury because they were engineers by nature and vocation. They loved to make all sorts of mechanisms and devices. Most of those devices ended up in the hands of other members of the research team. The proximity of the planet to the star provided them with an enormous amount of free energy to work with. According to the Scandinavian mythology, that world was called Svartalheim. As the dwarves could not spend too much time on the planet's surface, they had to live and work underground. To avoid fatigue, they had to travel to another place called Nidavellir. That was an area on the 4th planet that was allocated to the dwarves and their family members. The elves settled on the 2nd planet from the Sun. According to that same Scandinavian mythology, its name was Alfheim. We call it Venus today. That was a garden planet. Elves loved nature and knew how to take care of it. Same as the dwarves, a number of elves had to travel from time to time to other planets within the solar system. They had the duty of planting flora and maintaining it on each of the inhabited worlds. As each world had its own climate and environment, the elves needed to make sure that everything was in perfect harmony. At first, the 3rd planet from the Sun had the name of Vanaheim, as it was inhabited by a group of beings called Vanir. Vanir were a race of serpent-like dragons. This group was directly involved in research and assisted Thea, the head of the expedition. They were the ones developing environment models for each planet in the solar system. They were the ones who helped Thea create and distribute a large variety of life forms. The Vanir spent most of their time on the 3rd planet. Unlike elves and dwarves, they did not need to travel regularly between worlds. Today, it is difficult to know what was the original name of the planet we call Mars. You could say that it was the home world of the techies or geeks. As I already mentioned, one part of it was inhabited by dwarves. As you already know, its name was Nidavellir. The other part had belonged to those who the ancient Greeks called the Titans. Scandinavian myths called them Jotnar. The part of Mars that belonged to them was called Jotunheim. Unlike the serpent-like Vanir, the Jotnar looked more like dinosaurs with wings. We can safely call them the dragons of the European folklore. They were the direct helpers of Thea's husband. Unlike the dwarves, they did not make mechanisms and gadgets. They moved planets and their moons. They calculated the trajectories of the celestial bodies in our system and could adjust them or change them completely. Any task that required the use of tremendous force or knowledge of the laws of celestial bodies fell under their responsibility. Finally, on the fifth planet, the reptilians lived. Figuring out their exact appearance would have been an impossible job. Fortunately, the myths, folklore, and customs of many of the peoples of our planet can help us in doing that. I will discuss that topic much later. The fifth planet is known today under several different names. The myths of the ancient Sumer call it Nibiru. In Scandinavian literature, it has the name of Asgard. A number of 18th century astronomers called it planet Phaeton. In our times, that world is better known as the elusive Planet X. In those early days, it was a world 90% covered with water. It had lots of rivers, seas, and swamps. That environment was optimal for the original inhabitants of the planet. As I mentioned earlier, the reptilians' name among Sumerians was the Anunnaki. The Scandinavian myths called them Aesir. This race was not inclined to create things like the dwarves. Also, the reptilians did not have the power and knowledge of the Jotnar. Love of nature was not one of their abilities either, so they could not compete with the elves. They had a different ability. The reptilians made amazing watchers. They could stay still for hours on end, watching something, and not miss a single detail. Their duty was in perfect harmony with their innate abilities. The reptilians had to take care of the order on the planets and in the space between them. The Titans, along with the dwarves, installed a sophisticated monitoring system in Asgard. They wanted to make the job of their teammates easier. Both the main settlement and the planet shared the same name. From the control center of this system, the Aesir would monitor the state of the environment on different planets. They could also verify the proper functioning of the many devices made and installed by the dwarves. In the event of malfunctions, they were to report to those who could fix them. Thus, everyone was engaged in activities that suited them. There was peace and harmony in the research team, and it went on that way for thousands of years. Unfortunately, something unforeseen happened, an event that radically changed the life in the solar system. It affected it so much that we are still suffering its consequences. A fleet of ships unexpectedly arrived to the border of our system. I would like to pause here today. If you want to know what happens next, and you are not subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to be notified of new videos. If you liked it, click like and share with your friends and acquaintances. I welcome your questions in the comments. I'll be making videos with answers to the most popular questions. I wish you an eternal future in the vastness of the universe.
For the darkness is past and a legend yet grows.